Some people say they're hard. They ain't hard as this. This unbelievable true story was kept top secret until 2004 by the US military. Chima. Oh, I love saying that name. It sounds so cool. It's a small Japanese island about 500 miles south of the Japanese mainland. Chima. Chima was a small Japanese island, but it was set up real tight, if you know what I mean. The Japanese hooked it up. They put a military base on there, 2 radio towers, and 25,000 troops, and anti-aircraft guns. So the Americans really wanted that island. But the military advised against that, said it would be too dangerous. So America decided to do the next best thing. Bomb those 2 radio towers and cut off their communication. So on June of 1944, America would surround Chima with aircraft carriers and then launch airplanes to try to bomb those towers. But the Japanese were out so good. A couple months would pass with still no progress. America just wasn't able to bomb those towers. On September of 1944, America would plan its next raid to take Chima. And one of the pilots selected was a young 20-year-old George H.W. Bush. The father, not the son, if you guys know what I mean. He was 20 years old and he was the youngest pilot in the Navy at that time. This guy was hardcore. He was already shot down and ejected into the middle of the ocean and was rescued before. On the morning of this raid, George, along with his 2-man crew, Dell, the radio operator, and Ted, the door gunner, would board the plane, ready for some action. At 7:15 a.m., George, alongside with a dozen other airplanes, would take off and start their mission. George immediately flew up 8,000 feet because that would put him outside anti-aircraft gun range, meaning they wouldn't be able to be hit that way. But once they would get near that island, they would lower themselves and start bombing the towers, and then leave the island. But as George lowered his plane to go hit that tower, his plane would be hit! Guys, we're hit! Hang on tight! But he didn't want to give up on the mission. He continued to go lower, and he would fire 2 direct hits on the tower he was assigned to. Then he would turn his plane around to leave the island and tell the guys, hang on tight! We gotta get as far as possible from this island or we'll be captured. And he pulled on that leverage, trying to escape. Hang on tight, hang on tight. And Ted and Dell said, we gotta bail out now, we gotta bail out now. And he would tell them, not yet, hold on tight. And he pulled on that leverage, trying to get as far as possible. And then he would tell them, now, jump out now. And he would go and jump out the plane. Time out. Like and subscribe. God bless you. Do me right. I wouldn't do you guys wrong. And you know it. Let's go back. Time back in. As George was swimming in the ocean, he would see his airplane crash right into the ocean. He yelled out, Dell, Ted. He didn't know that both of them were killed. One of them didn't even jump out of the airplane and was killed on impact. And the other did jump out of the airplane, but his parachute never opened and he was killed. Anyway, nearby there was a life raft that came out of his airplane, so George swam to it and got inside. And then he would look and see. He saw Japanese speedboats heading towards him. He told himself, this is over. George told himself, I'm a dead man. But all of a sudden, he would see American aircrafts flying right above him and firing at those Japanese boats. He couldn't believe his luck. So he turned around and he started swimming. He swam for 2 hours, but he was so exhausted that he laid back in the life raft. George was suddenly awakened by an American submarine right next to him. He couldn't believe his luck. He was rescued. That day, 8 airmen jumped out of their airplanes and they were all believed that they had drowned to death. But that is not what happened to them. The United States found out exactly what happened to them, and it was gruesome, so they kept it top secret. But 60 years later, in 2004, an author named James Bradley would find transcripts of a war crime trial where Japanese officials confessed what they did. This is what took place. Unlike George, these 8 airmen had bailed out of their aircrafts too early, so they were captured. And that island was being bombed by the Americans for a couple of months, so the Japanese were so pissed off, they started abusing these men. Within 24 hours of these 8 men being captured, Marv Mershaw, only 19 years old from Long Beach, California, was tied up to a tree and beaten up all day long by everyone. The other soldiers couldn't do anything but watch. They couldn't help. That night they untied Marv and took him out to the jungle where he would see a freshly dug grave. And he would see a Japanese soldier holding a sword. They told him kneel down and gave him a cigarette. And let's just say he lost his head. That night, one of the high-ranked officials, Yoshio Tachibana, he was an alcoholic and he wasn't right in the head. He would tell his soldiers, I need you guys to prove the fighting spirit. So he told them, go dig up Marv and bring him to the cook. We're gonna eat his thigh. And the cook would take Marv's thigh and they all sat down and ate it. And they loved it. It was delicious. After a month of consuming Marv, Tachibana became superstitious. He believed by eating these guys, he would gain good health, power, and strength. So they brought all 7 Americans to the rifle range. The first one they grabbed was 25-year-old Floyd Hall from Missouri. They tied him up and started bayoneting him. Then when he was killed, they would remove his liver and gallbladder right in front of the remaining 6 American prisoners. Then they would grab 22-year-old Earl Vaughn from Texas. But he didn't want to go out like that, so he put up a fight. He wanted to die quickly, and he was going like this with his neck, like, cut my head off. But they didn't want to do that. But he was out of control, so they had to cut his head off. And then they would take his liver and gallbladder. And that night, high-ranked officials feasted on Earl and Floyd, and they loved it. It was delicious. I'm serious, they really did enjoy it. Within a few days, all 5 of them would be executed in a similar manner. 2 of them would be consumed. 1 of them would be freshly eaten, meaning they didn't kill him. When they wanted fresh meat, they would come and chop pieces of him. He kept the meat fresh for them. Eventually he would die. After the war ended, 34 Japanese soldiers, including General Tachibana, were charged with war crimes. They were all found guilty and executed. They were buried in unmarked graves in Guam. The other men on this island that kind of participated or really didn't do anything to stop these war crimes would be sentenced to 8 years in jail. George H.W. Bush found out what took place on that island when he was 80 years old. God bless him. And George H.W. Bush would be America's 41st president, and his son would be America's 43rd president. Can you guys imagine how history would have changed if George H.W. Bush was eaten up? I'm Ahmed Basir. Thank you guys for watching today's video. Please comment your opinion on this story. And please, like, share, and subscribe. God bless you. I'm out of this joint.